In a world torn apart with strife, he walked a very different path. The journey and the destination were one and the same. The freedom he sought was inseparable from peace and non-violence. Deeply rooted in India's civilizational values, Gandhi channelized the timeless philosophy of peace for the realities of the contemporary world. Truth for him was both the means and the end. The desire for truth, satyagraha, was the cornerstone of Gandhian politics and philosophy. The truth for Gandhi was the threading together of the principle of Sarvodaya, holistic development for all, and Antyodaya, upliftment and dignity for the weakest. Armed with this inner truth, Gandhi created a mass mobilization unmatched by anything the world has ever seen. Picking up a handful of salt as an act of defiance, or creating the political metaphor of the charkha, the humble handloom, his symbols for India's freedom embodied not only the deep moral strength of peaceful resistance, but also the vision of sustainability of an economy with human dimensions. Nothing ever happens in isolation. With startling clarity, Gandhi saw how the crisis of the modern world affects us all, and how the transition from conflict to cooperation needs a global response guided by a shared sense of humanity. His life was his message, walking together on the long road to peace and sustainability. Let us be the change we want in this world.
Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, my dear colleagues, permanent representatives and ambassadors in New York, distinguished guests joining us today, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this virtual event of commemoration organized by the Permanent Mission of India in New York to mark the International Day of Nonviolence and the culmination of the celebrations for the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Our event this morning is a fitting start to a day when the UN will be engaged in discussions that echo Mahatma's vision for peace and non-violence. As you know, later today, the 75th UN General Assembly will convene a high-level meeting on the International Day for Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. His Excellency Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been an eloquent proponent of Gandhiji's values and principles and the relevance of Gandhiji to our times. We deeply appreciate his presence alongside Prime Minister Narendra Modi during the high-level commemoration last year on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the great pleasure to invite Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, to deliver his address.
In marking the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, this International Day highlights the remarkable power of non-violence and peaceful protest. It is also a timely reminder to strive to uphold values that Gandhi lived by, the promotion of dignity, equal protection for all, and communities living together in peace. On this year's observance, we have a special duty: stop the fighting to focus on our common enemy, COVID-19. There is only one winner of conflict during a pandemic, the virus itself. As the pandemic took hold, I called for a global ceasefire. Today, we need a new push by the international community to make this a reality by the end of this year. Ceasefires would ease immense suffering, help to lower the risk of famine, and create space for negotiations towards peace. Deep mistrust stands in the way. Yet I see reasons for hope. In some places, we see a standstill in the violence. A great many member states, religious leaders, civil society networks, and others back my call. Now is the time to intensify our efforts. Let us be inspired by the spirit of Gandhi and the enduring principles of the UN Charter. Gandhiji's vision and philosophy are pillars of the work of the United Nations.
Un tragique événement domine nos pensées. Nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui sous l'empire de l'émotion qui vient de se répandre dans le monde à l'annonce de la mort de Gandhi.
The death of Mahatma Gandhi is a catastrophe, not only for India, but for men of goodwill everywhere.
It's time to heed the words of Gandhi. Intolerance is itself a form of violence and an obstacle to the growth of a true democratic spirit.
In an assembly shaped by the desire to end global wars, we must remember Gandhi's admonition that poverty is the worst form of violence.
Here, quote Gandhi, wonderful in their wisdom and in how topical they are. He said that by answering hatred with hatred, the only thing you're doing is help spread hatred.
We've spoken at length about peace, but no one has been able to do better than the definition of Gandhi regarding its condition as the sole path for humankind.
Permit me to quote from Mahatma Gandhi, who said, as I quote, "While we may never know what results may be achieved by our actions, it is clear that should no action be taken, then it can be reasonably anticipated that there will be no results."
Gandhi proved that non-violence, the principle and the practice, can change history.
It is an honor to be here at this temple of multilateralism to celebrate the ideals of someone who was perhaps the best possible proponent of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family.
Earlier this month, it was my deep personal honor to visit the Rajghat Memorial in India to pay my respects to one of the world's greatest leaders, Mahatma Gandhi. Tonight's theme of peace and non-violence is an appropriate tribute to his legacy.
गांधी जी भारतीय थे, लेकिन सिर्फ भारत के नहीं थे। आज ये मंच इसका जीवंत उदाहरण है।
Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, It is indeed my great pleasure to welcome you to the virtual commemoration of the International Day of Non-Violence. We are today commemorating the culmination of the celebrations of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. I also thank all ambassadors and permanent representatives for joining us on this occasion, and thank all those who have kindly shared their views on the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi in the video which will be broadcast later in the event. Mahatma Gandhi was born in India but belongs to all humanity. Excellencies, the 2nd of October has been designated as the International Day of Non-Violence to commemorate Mahatma Gandhi's single-minded pursuit of non-violence, leading inter alia to India's freedom from the British through a mass non-violent movement. There is no doubt that non-violence is and will always be directly relevant to address the burning issues of the day. Let us not forget that these issues are not merely those which are external to us, but those which are internal to us as well. It is therefore important that we discuss about non-violence and first understand what was the non-violence that Mahatma Gandhi talked about. When we look at Gandhi primarily as the apostle of peace and non-violence, I feel that we will be missing the point. That's because we are not discussing non-violence in a vacuum. Excellencies, the autobiography of Gandhi is called The Story of My Experiment with Truth. There is a very specific reason why it is titled that way. Gandhi's ultimate goal was truth. He realized that only the pursuit of truth could result in true non-violence. Just as for him, non-violence itself became the pursuit of truth. As Gandhiji said, devotion to truth is the sole justification for our existence. And as he also said, there should be truth in thought, truth in speech, and truth in action. That is why Gandhiji did not see political freedom as the only freedom worth fighting for, but involved himself with as much fervor and conviction in liberating human beings from all forms of bondage and injustice. It is in the context of his single-minded pursuit of truth should we view his pursuit of non-violence. Friends, non-violence for him was not merely the absence of violence. Non-violence for him was not merely to stop people from fighting with each other, nor was it merely a virtue for the final salvation of the individual. In Gandhi's hands, non-violence had a variety of meanings and uses, but always a tool for action. To Gandhi, non-violence was a weapon to fight injustice, both within and without. As Gandhi reminds us, a fight for justice can never be passive. It has to be an active fight, and in this, one can truly provide justice only when non-violence is used as a weapon. There can be no doubt that his famous non-violent salt satyagraha, which exposed colonial brutality, was a giant step to ensure the departure of the British from India in 1947. Non-violence, Gandhi said, included the smallest things in our existence and started at home. He frankly admitted that it was from his wife Kasturba that he learned his lesson on non-violence. He said, and I quote, "When non-violence is accepted as the law of life, it must pervade the whole being and not be applied to isolated acts." Love was another dimension of non-violence. Gandhi was to say, good brought through force destroyed individuality. Only when the change was effected through the persuasive power of non-violence, which is love, could the foundation of individuality be preserved and real abiding progress be assured for the world. For Gandhi, non-violence in thought, action, and existence was equivalent to the abundant love which we show to other human beings and indeed for all living things. Gandhi was equally categorical that non-violence was impossible without humility. As he confesses, it was only when he reduced himself to zero was he able to evolve the power of satyagraha in South Africa. A fearless man has no ego. Gandhi was also trying to find meaning and bring about a synthesis of the various challenges that he faced in his life through his own understanding of ahimsa or non-violence, non-cooperation, and satyagraha or truth force or holding firmly to truth. He called his search as experiments, since he was always evolving both as a thinker, as a freedom fighter, and as a human being to finally become the great Mahatma. Excellencies, non-violence for Mahatma Gandhi meant many things. We need to practice non-violence as a potent weapon for truth and to cleanse our own outer and inner selves. Therefore, on this International Day of Non-Violence, let us not forget our pursuit of truth, even as we remember our pursuit of non-violence. Today, let us rededicate ourselves not just to the path of non-violence, but equally rededicate ourselves to our pursuit of truth, both of which Gandhi showed us as indivisible. Thank you.
I'm grateful to His Excellency Ambassador T.S. Tirumurti, Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations, and the Permanent Mission of India for this opportunity to mark the International Day of Nonviolence, which is observed on the birth anniversary of the great Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhiji was one of the 20th century's greatest thinkers and humanists. His teachings transcended national boundaries, religion, and race. Gandhian principles of satya or truth, ahimsa, non-violence, sarvodaya, welfare of all, and satyagraha, peaceful protest, are universally relevant and have inspired the thinking of many global leaders. Gandhiji's timeless values and principles resonate with the purposes of the United Nations as enshrined in the organization's charter. They lie at the heart of the issues that we, as the representatives of our respective governments, address at the United Nations. Nonviolence, the promotion of peace, tolerance, and understanding, sustainable development and the elimination of poverty and inequality, international cooperation and solidarity, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, democracy and good governance. And in the context of both the current global health crisis as well as the looming climate crisis, Gandhiji's message of the interconnectedness, the interdependence of all living beings and the natural world offers profound wisdom. It reminds us that the well-being of one is intrinsically linked to the well-being of others. This is a conviction that underlies Bhutan's gross national happiness, which guides our perception of international relations as well as our own pursuit of a sustainable and greener future. On this International Day of Nonviolence, Bhutan joins the international community in celebrating the life and achievements of the great Mahatma. And as we observe the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, we hope that the world will continue to draw inspiration from the timeless principles and values of Gandhiji's life as we look towards a future of shared prosperity, peace, and well-being.
As the world grapples with a global pandemic, ongoing civil and sectarian conflicts and worsening humanitarian crises, Gandhi's guiding principles of peace, tolerance and non-violence are needed now more than ever. Mahatma Gandhi believed in the promise of a better world, one where peaceful protest and the principles of non-violent resistance could be harnessed to overcome oppression, where respect and tolerance for other people, cultures and beliefs leads to empathy and understanding, and one where the only war worth fighting is a war on poverty. In 1948, when India mourned the loss of this giant of peace, Australia also mourned. At the MCG, the Indian and Australian Test cricket teams observed a minute's silence before play, and in Canberra, our capital, flags were flown at half-mast. And while it's been almost a century since Gandhi's teachings were first tested, his influence continues to be felt around the world, including in the halls of the United Nations. As we mark the International Day of Non-Violence, we confront new challenges to building and sustaining lasting peace, including the COVID-19 pandemic. It's therefore critical that we, as Member States, recommit ourselves to the principles of conflict resolution through non-violence. We must all work together to not only put an end to this pandemic, but to put an end to the conflicts that continue to destabilise our world. As Mahatma Gandhi observed, peace cannot simply be defined as the absence of violence and discrimination. It's also the presence of justice, tolerance and equality. Realising this aspiration will require our collective effort. Thank you.
I'm honoured and delighted to join today's virtual event to commemorate the International Day of Non-Violence. I thank the Permanent Mission of India for organising this commemorative event and for giving me this opportunity to speak. On this auspicious occasion, I pay my deep homage to Mahatma Gandhi, who championed the cause of peace and non-violence, which continues to inspire the peace-loving people of the world. As my Prime Minister had said at last year's 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi celebrated at the United Nations, and I quote, "Gandhiji, a true patriot, a statesman and a saint, dedicated his life for humankind. His brilliant and mesmerizing leadership showed the world that an individual could bring earth-shaking social and political change in a non-violent way." End of quote. That indeed resonates closely with Bangladesh's abiding commitment and faith in the power of peace. It is a happy coincidence that this year Bangladesh is celebrating the birth centenary of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Gandhiji's love for the good of the common people and his ideals of non-violence also influenced Bangabandhu and his lifelong struggle to establish justice and freedom for his people. In his maiden speech to the United Nations General Assembly in 1974, Bangabandhu had said, and I quote, "Peace is an imperative for the survival of mankind." And it was that vision of peace which guided our efforts to facilitate a resolution in the UN on the culture of peace for the last 21 years. That concept and the resolution have deep resonance to the enduring doctrine of peace and non-violence as espoused by Mahatma Gandhi. In fact, these two powerful notions complement and synergize the efforts being undertaken by the United Nations. The world today is confronted with the new forms of violence, conflict, and intolerance that are driving the human race apart. Yet the solution remains very basic, inculcating peace in our minds and our lives. And the philosophy of non-violence stands out as the cornerstone in our pursuit of peace and development, its relevance undiminished. Gandhiji's principles of tolerance, non-violence, peace and harmony are essential elements as we strive to transform our societies, nations and the world in our pursuit of Agenda 2030 in this decade of action. We need to invest more efforts on reaching targets like SDG 4.7 through education to promote a culture of peace and non-violence, prerequisites to achieve sustainable development. As our nations and people continue to fight the pandemic, We need more than ever before a culture of peace and non-violence to forge solidarity, tolerance, compassion, and cooperation in overcoming this unprecedented crisis and to bring out the best in humanity. I thank you.
It is a great pleasure and a profound honor to join on behalf of the Brazilian people and of the Brazilian government in the commemorations of Mahatma Gandhi's 150th anniversary. It is a fortunate but not fortuitous coincidence that the United Nations, which embodies Gandhi's ideals of peace through non-violent means, will be celebrating within a fortnight the 75 years of its foundation. Sadly, when the UN was ushering in a new era in international politics, one where multilateral diplomacy was tasked with preventing armed struggle among nations, India lost her founding father to intolerance and violence. Now the world gathers to celebrate and honor the shared legacy of one and another. As a country that has always partaken of the vision that peace is achieved through dialogue, conciliation, and diplomacy, Brazil once again joins India in cherishing and promoting the ideals of peace and development for which the United Nations flag flies around the world. To our Indian friends around the world, and especially our dear colleagues at the Permanent Mission of India to the United Nations, our very best wishes today and always. Please count on Brazil to keep waging peace, promoting development, and advancing the cause of justice on the world stage.
Non-violence is mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the ingenuity of man. Mahatma Gandhi. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to talk to you on this occasion. The commemoration of the International Day of Non-Violence and the celebration of the 151 birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, the global icon of peace and non-violence. We should also note that this year spells the 75th anniversary of the foundation of the United Nations. Unfortunately, war and conflicts have been with us from the onset of civilization. Notably, the advance of modern weaponry brought about deaths on staggering extent. This is what pushed the founders of the United Nations to form an institution focused not only on ending wars but also tackling its root causes. In this vein, Mahatma Gandhi's ideas inspired the UN's founders in incredible ways and shaped the norms and principles of the United Nations stands for today. Indeed, Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy transcends the bounds of race, nation states, religious views, and have emerged as the great prophetic voice of the 20th century. As Mahatma Gandhi has always said, non-violence is a weapon of the strong. We should see it that way. The whole world remembers Gandhi not merely for his fervent loyalty of the practice of non-violence and humanism, but as a yardstick against which we test leaders in the public circles, political concepts, and the government policies, as well as the benchmark for the optimism and aspirations of our world. The international community celebrates the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi as the International Day of Non-Violence, an excellent opportunity to create public awareness. The General Assembly's resolution aims to solidify the universal relevance of the principle and ideology of nonviolence and the aspiration for securing a culture of peace, tolerance, and understanding. This resolution reflects the universal respect for Mahatma Gandhi and the lasting relevance of his philosophy. Remember, we are not as strong enough to be utterly non-violent in ideas, words, and practices. But we can keep, and we should keep, non-violence as our chief objective and make decisive steps towards that end. Thank you very much.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start with a lesson learned from a dark period of time of Hungarian history. In 1849, a huge oppression was imposed on the Hungarians since we lost the War of Independence. And that was the year immediately when a grassroots movement was born by the educated elite in Hungary, by refusing the jobs offered by the Austrian Empire in bureaucracy and in the military. And I would say it was an early form of civil resistance, and it led to, in a way, undermining the functionality of the monarchy. And that was what led us to create the new formation, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. We know that non-violence is a great tool in the hands of those who understand politics, who understand the structure of the society, who understand the decision-making process. And for decades later, in the 20th century, when we think about non-violence, we immediately think about the life of Mahatma Gandhi. Today, I would say non-violence is not only a tool, it is an attitude. The United Nations was born out of the ashes of the Second World War. So we really here just have to believe in the importance of non-violence. The essence of this diplomacy is based on dialogue, mutual acceptance, tolerance, arguing, listening to each other. And this is the essence, of course, of the movement of Culture of Peace, of which I'm proud to be part of from the very beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to be clear and honest in our messages, build solidarity and unity, and it should remain sensitive and responsive to the impact what today this pandemic makes on each of every of us, on each and every country and nation and community. The essence of the culture of peace is the process of the individual, collective, and institutional transformation. Its objective is the empowerment and partnership of people. This is for me today diplomacy based on non-violence. This is today for me the lesson learned from Mahatma Gandhi. And I hope that the biggest figures of history who believed in that, who showed us an example, look upon us and give us strength every day. I thank you.
Let me begin this message with a simple question. Do you believe in the power of non-violence? As the world observes the International Day of Non-Violence, let us be reminded that Mahatma Gandhi was not only a firm believer of the power of non-violence itself, but as a global icon of peace. He was also constantly using the power to creating more peace in this world. And after decades, his vision and belief still resonate in our communities. His teaching of ahimsa, satyagraha, leading towards sarvodaya, is still valid and relevant in today's international relations. Indeed, many have doubted the effectiveness of non-violence approaches in resolving conflicts. Some may say that it indicates weakness as well as inadequacy, and that the entire process of resorting to non-violence is time-consuming. Not us. Indonesia has advocated this principle of non-violence embedded in our culture since ages ago. In today's world, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic, it is more important than ever to embrace non-violent strategies. It is more important than ever to promote and spread awareness on this. And it is more important than ever for the United Nations with the entire global community to lead by example on how multilateralism and strong cooperation between countries in tackling global challenges can result in tangible solutions. As the global village continues to expand with various interests and problems, ahimsa becomes more and more important. Indonesia has always been active in promoting peace, tolerance, and dialogue. We strongly believe that a sustainable peace and a solution to any conflict can only be achieved through peaceful means. Peace will lead to development and prosperity. Love thy neighbors, spread the message of non-violence to everyone. Let us say no to violence, and let us give peace a chance. Ahimsa forever.
I'm delighted to join with you to mark the International Day of Non-Violence. Today we're also coming together to recall the enduring legacy of Mahatma Gandhi, 150 years since his birth. Mahatma Gandhi is deeply revered in my country, in Ireland, as he is all across the globe. His philosophy on non-violence, what he described as the greatest force at our disposal, continues to be a source of inspiration. Mahatma Gandhi stood against violence and against hatred, but he also stood for social justice and for treating all people with dignity. He dedicated himself to challenging inequality, and he called for respecting our environment. These principles are just as relevant today as they ever were, and as we mark the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. The principles and the commitment of Mahatma Gandhi accompany us to this day. They accompany us in our common fight against COVID. In the Secretary-General's call for a global ceasefire, we're reminded of his steadfast resolve as we face into efforts to build back better, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm always reminded of Mahatma Gandhi's unwavering convictions as we continue to work to eliminate nuclear weapons, to ensure gender equality, and to tackle climate change. Mahatma Gandhi's commitment to human rights and to recognizing that respect for human rights is critical to ensuring peaceful, equitable, and just societies is deeply ingrained in the Irish psyche. Ireland has always shown a steadfast commitment to building peace and preventing conflict. As an incoming member of the Security Council, we will work hard to promote sustainable, durable solutions to conflict. Put simply, violence can, should never be the answer. Mahatma Gandhi's words serve as a continuing inspiration to all as we work to advance the cause of peace and development. They serve as a reminder of what can be achieved through the force of argument and persuasion, rather than the force of arms.
Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, it is a great honor for me to speak on this occasion to celebrate the International Day of Nonviolence. I would like to thank Ambassador Tirumurti of India for inviting me to this momentous event. This day of October the 2nd reminds us of the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi: non-violence, tolerance, and compassion. These virtues illuminate our path towards resolving complex issues humanity faces today. Gandhiji's philosophy of Sarvodaya, welfare of all, and Antodaya, leaving no one behind, now takes the form of the SDGs. And this year we enter the extremely challenging decade of action. Today, the challenges we face are greater than ever in diversity and in scale due to the COVID-19, which is causing a serious human security crisis. It spreads across the borders, strikes the most vulnerable segment of society, and threatens people's survival, livelihood, and dignity. Human security is at stake, and the international community should join hands, keeping Sarvodaya and Antodaya in mind. Let us focus on people and work together. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Last week, September 26th, was the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We must never again repeat the devastation of war. I sincerely hope that Gandhian principles, which foster peace and mutual respect, will inspire our efforts to achieve a world without nuclear weapons, a world free from fear and from violence. To conclude, I'd like to congratulate India and Happy International Day of Non-Violence. Thank you.
Dear Ambassador Tirumurti, dear friends, it's my pleasure and Lebanon's pleasure and honor to join you today in celebrating the International Day of Non-Violence that coincides this year with the end of the 2-year commemoration of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. It also falls on the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, an organization that shares at its core values Gandhi's vision and philosophy. There is no time more important than today to celebrate Gandhi's life and message, because his life of peace, non-violence, humility, truth, tolerance, and loving kindness is the message. In the time of the COVID pandemic, when the world is on its knees, we need to look hard and honestly on what our world is missing. We lost compassion to one another. We lost understanding. We lost to turn the other cheek, as another peace messenger told us. We lost how to celebrate our humanity and others. And we focused on greed, on canceling the other, on violence and wars. We destroyed our nature, created imbalance in our environment, and put our planet with all its living creatures on the edge of disaster. We need to stand up on our feet with the path that Gandhi pointed the way to, and not with the tools that brought us down in the first place. We in Lebanon cherish Mahatma Gandhi and his message of tolerance, because we suffered wars and conflicts all our lives. We lived through periods of intolerance and denying the humanity of others, but we learned to coexist together in peace. Non-violence for us is not a slogan. It is the only way we can survive and thrive together. We learned from Gandhi that an eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. I hope we continue to remember and live by this, not only in Lebanon, but in the world over. Today, as the world reels under increased injustice and rising poverty and inequality, we need to always remember Gandhi's teachings and vision for fighting injustice with non-violence. As conflicts around the world increase in severity and number, we need to remember Gandhi's message of peace and non-violence. The Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued an appeal for a global ceasefire. I hope people heed his message and we stop and start all over again by pointing the guns at the ills of our world and not at each other. Just a few days ago, we celebrated the International Day of Peace under the theme Shaping Peace Together. We need to work together to shape the future of peace that we want. But as Gandhi said, we must be the change that we wish to see in the world. To shape peace together, we need to work together. We need to strengthen multilateralism, uplift each other, and work work with the conviction that none of us will know peace till all of us live in peace and harmony. I thank you.
I am very honored to participate in the commemoration of the International Day of Nonviolence and to celebrate Gandhi Jayanti, the birth anniversary of the Apostle of Peace, the revered Mahatma Gandhi. His philosophy and teachings are today as relevant as they were during his lifetime. Sarvodaya, the notion of welfare to all, and Atodaya, leaving no one behind, are now embedded in our discourse and have become the basis of our sustainable development goals. The following reflection of Gandhi: Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not any man's greed, inspires our action on protection of the planet and the concept of sustainable production and consumption. Gandhi's philosophy is therefore more than ever essential and relevant. मित्र भाव से रहे तो जगत के रूप बदल जाए. If everyone lives with a feeling of friendship, then the whole world will undergo change. His compassion for the poor and the vulnerable, social justice, gender equality, abhorrence of waste, the essential oneness of all life, and international solidarity resonate and amplify the very purpose of our United Nations. Mahatma Gandhi has a profound historical connection with my country. He visited Mauritius in 1907 and acquainted himself with the plight and harsh living conditions of indentured laborers. He encouraged them to stand up for their rights and their freedom. He would eventually send Manilal Doctor to do precisely that. Such was the impact of Mahatma Gandhi movement that March 12th, which marked the start of his Dandi Salt March, was chosen as the day of the independence of Mauritius. Mahatma Gandhi would have no doubt supported a rules-based system where all countries, large or small, enjoyed equal rights and respected the rule of law. As we celebrate Gandhi Jayanti and the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, it is our responsibility and within our ability to strive for unity in diversity as a means to face new and unprecedented global challenges. Gandhi's philosophy and lessons have always inspired and motivated me. I encourage you all to follow his teachings, and together we will create a better and peaceful world. Thank you.
What is the meaning of Satyagraha in these times when the multilateral prospect is tested by pandemic, conflict, and climate change? What would Gandhiji say about a world so inclined to disintegration precisely at the moment when unity is needed? This pandemic has already taken more than 1 million people worldwide. Only decisive global leadership with unified action can help bring an end to this threat quickly. A proliferation of environmental disasters, from pollution in our oceans to extensive land waste. We are failing nature on a massive scale. A sixth extinction is a possibility. Before nature abandons us, let us accelerate our efforts. This is precisely the time we need to foster trust and collaboration between countries and recommit ourselves to multilateralism. Climate change presents us with a 10-year deadline for substantive action. Ice is melting and sea level is rising everywhere. The Maldives is an island nation surrounded by sea, embraced by water. An individual droplet of water may be mistaken for a teardrop, a path of futility spoiling the beauty of a possible future. But if all the individuals of the world unite in a single entity, then an ocean of hope is born, holding afloat the future of nations, of mankind. Today, young people have adopted the technique of non-violent demonstrations. to hold world leaders and all global elders to task for our inaction. This is a moment when we must listen to younger generations. Their voice is clearer than ours. The best way to commemorate the great Mahatma Gandhi ji is to unify, not disintegrate. To be the leaders that young people expect us to be, and to act effectively where action is needed, while avoiding the distractions that are ever before us. Thank you.
Excellencies, friends, distinguished colleagues, today is a special day as we commemorate the International Day of Nonviolence. It is also a high honor for me to commemorate with you the 153rd anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi is a global icon whose ideas continue to inspire and drive our efforts for a more peaceful and sustainable world. Indeed, enlightened nonviolence is never passive, never silent, nor indifferent to injustice. Therefore, we should not be content just with the absence of violence, but we should strive towards sustaining peace. We should stand for the power of nonviolence. It transforms and shapes societies. We shall join to raise our voice to denounce injustice, racism, discrimination, hate speech, xenophobia, corruption, and inequality. The voice for non-violent, peaceful change speaks louder than guns and hate. Non-violence is about principles. It goes in hand with the respect of human rights, tolerance, meaningful participation, and dialogue. Nonviolence is a precondition to sustainable development. It underpins all of our work at the United Nations. October 2nd is also a date of profound significance in the memory and conscience of Mexicans, as we commemorate the peaceful demonstrations of the student movement of 1968, who were brutally repressed and lost their lives at the Tlatelolco Square in Mexico City. More than half a century may have passed, but the spirit and legacy of the student movement of 1968 lives on today. Friends and colleagues, October 2nd is not only a day of commemoration, it's not only a day of remembrance. It should be above all a day of commitment. It is a date to renew our commitment to nonviolence. Today, we affirm that peaceful and nonviolent change are the best means to guide us forward. Mexico will take this message, along with prevention, to the Security Council next year. In these turbulent times, let me end by stating once again that we are proud to support the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire in response to COVID-19 and to reaffirm its commitment to nonviolence and the principles that it stands for. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, friends, these are turbulent times. The challenges precipitated by COVID-19 have presented our international community with its greatest test since the Second World War. Concurrently, increased geopolitical tensions and growing fragmentation across our multilateral system serves to undermine unity and solidarity when we need them the most. As we seek to address the strong headwinds and rising tides of climate change, extinguish the glowing embers of conflict, and achieve collectively our sustainable development ambitions. Gandhi's philosophy of thought in action serves as a guidepost for the renewed multilateralism that we urgently need and rightfully deserve. Indeed, truth, equity, justice, and peaceful struggle are more than just lofty principles. They represent a way of thinking and being to keep us all grounded amidst the ebbs and flows of these tumultuous times. As we bear witness to global movements for racial, social, gender, and climate justice, let us open our hearts and minds with love, patience, and understanding. And as we grapple with the many-sided complexities of this modern world, including the rise of xenophobia, hate speech, and disinformation, now is the time to courageously break these artificial divisions that keep our nations and peoples apart. Excellencies, as we seek to build back better from COVID-19, we can be guided by Gandhi's fearlessness and compassion. Although our struggles are not easy and victory can never be assured, we must stand firm in our solemn defense of the truth, in the security of ourselves and of each other, and in the protection of the natural environment on which all life depends. Let us move forward together, peacefully and resolutely, as we craft a better future for all of humanity. I thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the permanent representative of India to the United Nations for inviting me to share my thoughts on the occasion of the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi. I'm glad that we found a way to celebrate this icon this year, despite the restrictions caused by the emergence of the novel coronavirus, COVID-19. There's no more auspicious time to recommend Gandhi's values than now. In the face of threats to peace and security around the world, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, we must always remind ourselves that if we will find a lasting solution to our challenges, we'll have to draw from the examples of our heroes past. Gandhi is one of those heroes. His life was an exceptional one, as he embodied the essence of peace and non-violence and respect for especially the downtrodden. His teachings on these core values are as relevant today as they were at his time. It's in cognizance of what he stood for that the General Assembly of the United Nations passed a resolution to celebrate and mark his birthday, the 2nd of October. Every year is therefore marked as the International Day of Non-Violence. In observance of this day, we must continue to be inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's resoluteness, courage, respect, equality, empathy, and non-violence, which are all key to achieving and sustaining peace. Even when we disagree, we must take a cue from him by ensuring that we communicate our disagreements in a peaceful, non-violent manner and with the aim of finding a just solution. Gandhi's values are not different from those that we work to uphold in the United Nations. Our founding fathers created the organization to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war and to advance human rights and progress. How best can we achieve this if not by rededicating ourselves to work for peace, by, among other things, eschewing violence, respecting human rights, and ensuring sustainable development? We must, like Gandhi, fight for those who have nothing, no matter the sacrifices that we have to make. We must respect each other, no matter our nation's circumstance or size. The United Nations is better positioned than it was a few decades ago to respond to the challenges of our time, be it in relation to poverty, social justice, inclusion, conflicts, pandemics, climate change, terrorism, and so on. We must never forget Gandhi's admonition that the earth we occupy is a loan from our children and not an inheritance from our forefathers. We must therefore do our best to ensure that our activity does not destroy the future. We celebrate Gandhi today because he's too important to be forgotten. The world will continue to reflect on and learn from his leadership as it strives to resolve the crisis that bedevil it. I'm also hopeful that a reflection on Gandhi's life will remind us that we are not safer because we keep the best armory. Empathy and justice are more potent instruments for peace. I thank you.
Greetings to you all. This is Mohammed Al-Hassan, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Sultanate of Oman to the United Nations, and I'm very honored to take part in this day of commemoration on the International Day of Nonviolence, which coincides on the 2nd of October every year. During this time where the world is going through some challenges, I think there is always a beacon of hope. The non-violent approach to peace and development, which is demonstrated by the great Mahatma Gandhi, I believe it is a legacy for the international community to celebrate. His efforts calling for non-violence is something that is celebrated every year by the international community. The birthday of Mahatma Gandhi as a global icon of peace and non-violence is something that is recorded throughout the world. Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy is not only limited to India, but this is the philosophy that has traveled all over the world. It is worth celebrating. It is also worth embracing. We in the Sultanate of Oman cherish the philosophy of this great leader and great philosopher and great visionary. His legacy and lasting words will be taught for so many generations to come. We celebrate with the people of India and the rest of the international community on this very important day. Thank you.
All protocol observed. Excellencies, friends. At the outset, I wish to thank His Excellency Ambassador Tirumurthy and his able team at the Permanent Mission of India for organizing this virtual commemoration of the International Day of Nonviolence, and it is indeed an honor to participate to share some thoughts. This year's commemoration is most significant as it also marks the closing of a year of remembrance of the 150th birth anniversary of the great Mahatma Gandhi, whose birthday we celebrate today. The Mahatma's timeless thinking, principles and philosophy of non-violence have left an indelible mark across the globe, thereby shaping the manner in which we seek to resolve conflicts, overcome hatred and promote justice, reform, compassion and welfare of one another. All our countries have been influenced by the Mahatma. His visit to my own country Sri Lanka, then Ceylon in 1927, had him interacting and addressing a cross-section of our society, from the public, religious leaders, students and youth, and culminating in inspiring many of our leaders, teachers and social activists. The largest civil society organization in Sri Lanka, the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement, working on development, education and conflict resolution across the country at community and grassroots levels, has been deeply influenced by the Gandhian principles of truth, non-violence and welfare of all. Friends, the Mahatma has once said, and I quote, "Non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind." End of quote. This spirit runs through the UN Charter and inspired chapters on negotiation, mediation, arbitration, judicial settlement and peaceful ways to conflicts and threat to peace. It also underlies the work of us diplomats seeking to negotiate through compromise, consensus in a bid to forge peaceful solutions to conflicts. In the era of globalization and rise of inequality and social upheavals, Mahatma's ideals and commitment to social justice and the downtrodden provide inspiration to seek solutions for society. At this time, when the world is facing conflicts and complex challenges, and in particular when the world is suffering from the ravages of a pandemic, and associated economic and social challenges, Gandhiji's principles become most relevant. It is our fortune that these vital principles are reflected in the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Today, perhaps at no other time in our current history, must not we be guided by his values and be deeply committed to humanity as a single family? More than ever now, we need to work together collectively for a sustainable world of peace and development. Gandhiji in his lifetime demonstrated the power of peacefully opposing oppression and hatred and the manner in which truth, cooperation and tolerance can prevail over injustice, racism and hatred. Let us on this special day be inspired by his courage and conviction and renew our commitment to non-violence as we continue our work to advance peace, sustainable development and human rights for all through the United Nations and the international world stage. I thank you.
Every year, on the International Day of Non-Violence, we celebrate the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, who was born 150 years ago. We remember and reflect on his life. His wisdom and heritage has had a lasting impact on each and every one of us. Throughout his life, Gandhi remained committed to his belief in non-violence, even under brutal oppressive regime and in the face of seemingly unsurmountable challenges. It is worth mentioning the close relationship of ideas of Mahatma Gandhi and the famous Russian writer Leo Tolstoy. In 1909, Gandhi wrote to him, "I'm very happy to learn your scriptures that impacted my worldview. I want to hear your advice on issues of your lifetime." In 1910, Tolstoy, in his detailed response to Gandhi, stressed that non-violence is the matter of the great significance, not only for India, but for all the mankind. 75 years ago, after the destructive Second World War, Gandhi's philosophy of non-violence influenced the work of the founders of the United Nations. These principles of peaceful settlement of disputes saved millions of people from the scourge of war. Finding peaceful solutions to differences is the only way forward. Otherwise, the development gains that we have worked for so hard to achieve could easily be lost. The current COVID-19 pandemic shows the fragility and interconnectivity of our world. We are convinced that only our true unity based on mutual respect and understanding will help us to overcome this global crisis. In this regard, I would like to quote Mahatma Gandhi's words: "Non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. It is mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the ingenuity of man." We hope that this unprecedented global threat will unite all the nations and will enhance international solidarity. Gandhi once said, "You must be the change you want to see in the world." Our joint efforts will help us not only to recover from the crisis, but to build a better world for everyone.
Today, October 2nd, the United States joins the people of India and our United Nations family in honoring and celebrating the life and teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. Happy birthday, Gandhi. We could really use your presence today. Thankfully, your inspiration and guidance still resonates around the world. Gandhi's message of love, unity, compassion, and tolerance is needed now more than ever in a world undergoing profound political, social, and economic challenges. This is especially true in 2020 as we fight an unprecedented pandemic and witness autocratic governments in Asia, South America, Eastern Europe, and in the Middle East torture and murder dissidents and violently crack down on peaceful protest. Mahatma's principles and appeal to morality serve us here at the United Nations. From defending human rights to peacekeeping, to stepping up to meet the dire needs of refugees, and even to confronting threats to international peace and security. Our celebration this year, in the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, is an especially opportune moment to reflect on Gandhi's teachings of nonviolence, which inspired and shaped the principles on which the United Nations was founded. In the United Nations' 75th year, all of us are suffering the devastating effects of COVID-19. Gandhi's message of compassion and sacrifice to improve the lives of our neighbors ring more true than ever. The American people are answering the call. We are devoted to this pandemic. We are devoted to the pandemic's response and recovery, including a vital research and development of a vaccine. Gandhi's life and teachings are as relevant today as they were during the struggle for India's independence, and his message of nonviolence has long resonated with the American people. His teachings profoundly affected American civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and influenced the civil rights movement in the United States. As fellow democracies, the United States and India share a connection between those two peaceful icons of nonviolence. Let us work today to uphold the values for which Gandhi stood and Gandhi strived for justice in our words and deeds, as he did.
India, a national community celebrating Gandhiji's 150th birthday today. The theme of this year's anniversary, a non-violent approach to peace and development, is timely as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations that was created from the ashes of violent, destructive wars of fascism and Nazism to ensure maintenance of global peace and security, peaceful coexistence of nations, respect of human rights, social progress, and fundamental freedoms. We celebrate Gandhiji's birthday in the midst of the greatest global calamity since the Second World War caused by COVID-19 pandemic. Our lives have changed, our economies have been battered, development has been halted, job lost, poverty increased. 32 million of our people all over the world have been infected and 1 million have died from coronavirus pandemic. We are divided, we fight against each other. Gandhiji arrived in South Africa towards the end of the 18th century from London, very aristocratically dressed as a well-educated, qualified British trained barrister. He came to defend indentured Indian laborers brought by the British to South Africa to work in the sugarcane plantations, the reality of racial oppression and subjugation, and the miserable conditions under which his fellow Indian and the majority of Africans lived shocked him and changed him. He formed the Indian National Congress, started newspaper with fellow African friend Dr. Dube, who later helped to form the African National Congress in 1912. Gandhiji started a new concept of resistance against racial injustice, Satyagraha, the truth force, and promoted ahimsa, non-violent approach to racial oppression and discrimination. Gandhiji's philosophy of ahimsa shaped the resistance in South Africa from 1912 to 1961, almost half a century, a peaceful resistance. Gandhiji returned to India at the first half of the 19th century to lead the struggle against British colonization as a Mahatma Gandhi. South Africa reality changed Gandhi, made him Mahatma. South Africa taught Gandhi tactics of resistance and mass mobilization. He started living a simple life, crisscross India, mobilizing peaceful end of colonization. Mahatma Gandhi teaching of Satyagraha and ahimsa are so relevant today, as so many contradictions and differences have emerged in our societies all over the world. As we seek situations to the merit of conflict, challenges and tendencies, we may borrow from Gandhiji's teachings as we build better in the post-coronavirus ravaged environment and restore conflict-ridden societies and external interferences. Let's draw from Gandhiji's teaching, Gandhi's philosophy of Satyagraha, and Mahatma and Nelson Mandela's legacy of truth and reconciliation, peaceful resolution of conflicts, negotiations and mediation could contribute to a more peaceful and harmonious world in years to come. I thank you.
वैष्णव जन तो तेरे कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई
सकल लोक मान सहने वंदे सकल लोक मान सहने वंदे निंदा ना करे के नीरे
निंदा न करे के नीरे वाच काच मना निश्चल राखे धन धन जनानी देनी रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे
दुखे उपकारे करे कोई मनभिमान आने रे
सकल लोकमा सहुणे वंदे
निंदा न करे के नीरे जीवा थकिय सत्य न बोले भर धन नव ज्वले हाथ रे
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे सकला तीरता तेरा तारा मारे
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे पर तुमका उपकार करे तो ये मन विमान ना
Vanalo bini kapatera hitseche kamakrara nivarare
भाणे नरसायो ठेनो दर्शन करता खुड़ाई को तेरे थार्या रे
वैष्णव जन तो तेरे कहीं जे पीड़